Boy, howdy, hermano. How's it hanging? The name is Stench, on account of the fact that I make a real stinky mess with my pistoles. Now hear me out, I know what you're thinking. What is good old Stench here doing on a backwater planet like this? Well, friends, the organization and all their wisdom want this planet under their growing empire. So they sent old Stench in preemptively to cripple the local government. What's that? You don't think I could do it all by myself, eh? How about a little demonstration on some of the local wildlife? Need I say more? I didn't think so. Well, the conquering and decimation of this planet isn't going to happen on its own, though, so it's time that we get a move on. I traveled for many hours, and by the time the sun began to set, I stopped in at an abandoned city for a little bit of fun. I thought it could be a good way to find some of the lowest forms of hospitality the planet has to offer. This place was absolutely crawling with shitty, stinky bandits around every corner. I thought it might be a good idea before moving on to the real threats of the planet to have a little bit of target practice. As a summer night's breeze dawned upon the ruins of this fair place, I spent many an hour having some good quality time with the locals. Oh my, what have we here? Such a delectable little treat for the nostrils, eh? Oh, perhaps this planet is good for something, don't mind if I do. After a quick bump, I was feeling a little bit peckish. Luckily, these folks had some nice meals. It's just a shame that my taste buds are eviscerated from all the implants and serums. Nevertheless, throughout the night, my blood-lusting rampage would continue as I went building to building, room to room, looking for anyone and everyone that I could kill. I was also attempting to maybe spot a few weapons or items that I thought could be fun to use against the local leadership, but I came up empty-handed. By morning, a caravan of these bandits had returned back to this city to find most of their friends and family completely slaughtered, by my hands of course. One of these silly little fellas tried to throw some toxic gas at me. Is that, I'm getting hints of cinnamon, apricot perhaps, apple even maybe? No, actually, I think that might be arsenic. Ooh. Ah, there you are. I think we could use a little bit of a palate cleanser, if you will. Unfortunately, I had killed all of the bandits, so I ran out of people to slaughter, and I used up all of their drugs, so I guess it's time for us to get a move on to our main goal. It would seem to me that this planet, as many in this galaxy, are still controlled by the remnants of the once great empire now shattered. Ah, how I remember when it used to be in its infancy. They're just as rude and aggressive now as they always were. What if I were coming here to try to be their friend and they're firing their mortars at me? Well, it's a good thing I'm not here for any diplomacy. I'm only here to reap souls. God, I love my job. First, I decided to start with their defenses, some of their mini turrets and their uranium slug turrets, which were completely inaccurate. Poor fools. Still using the old models from centuries ago, I see. Realistically, I'm doing you a favor by getting rid of them. Naturally, their next step after I took out their defenses was to try to bum rush me and fire a doomsday rocket at me, which had very little effect. As one might imagine, I was quite literally running circles around them, shooting them in the head and the pancreas, and just having a good time all around. Speaking of which, I decided to give them the real runaround. No, quite literally, I began running circles around this entire mountain that contained their base, while they were quite confused and struggling to keep up, I must say. I thought it might be a fun idea to run inside their base and hide and wait for them, but I came upon a very large stash of weapons. They actually managed to pin me inside and gather up at the door to begin firing at me. Of course, as one could imagine, this didn't exactly work out in their favor. I was cutting through them like a red, smoldering hot knife through butter. The scent of black powder and entrails was hot in my nostrils, only to be disguised by all of the death acidifiers going off. After an hour or so, these poor fools decided that it would be in their best interest for them to flee, but as they were attempting to leave the area, I'm afraid that I would have to intervene just a little bit. Now, look, little fella, I'm gonna level with you. Some of you can be part of the labor camps once we completely take over, but you're not one of those people. Sorry. Now, with all its inhabitants gone, we would return back to the base to finish off what few defenses they actually had remaining. Once that was taken care of, we would finally claim this damned place in the name of Void. It had been completely decimated. Not to worry though, my friends, soon your entire planet shall follow. Just be patient with me, okay? As we started looking through the remains of this little settlement, we ended up finding something of an ancient ship of sorts, though I have a feeling it's not operational, otherwise they probably would have gathered up in here and ran away from me like the cowards they are. Although that being said, it would seem they had some useful items aboard that they hadn't used. An orbital beam targeter, don't mind if I do. And a bombardment targeter? Oh, it must be my birthday. I also found a nice cozy little bed with my name on it, quite literally. I'm sure that cozy little cot would feel quite nice on my back if I had any feeling, but it's just a shame I have no use for sleep. Quite literally, I don't sleep at all. However, I do have to keep the biological war machine that is my body fueled, and thus I am feeling a little hungry at the moment, it seems. Homegrown rice and muffalo steaks. Wash it all down with a little bit of psychite tea. Sorry about that, darling, but something tells me you won't be needing it anymore, and I could really use a sip. Now then, back to more important matters. As you can see, this gun stockpile is absolutely ginormous, and even though the base is destroyed, what's going to prevent them from coming back and taking all their weapons and rebuilding? Funny you should ask, because I am. Yeah, I think that'll do it. There's still a few guns left, but those will burn up with a little bit of time, I'm sure. It's a shame we don't have any weenies or squirrel bits or anything to roast on the fire. Oh well. Well, it looks like my work here is done. Time to move on to the next. But first, a little taste of go juice. Since it wasn't too far off, I decided to stop in at yet another local raider, bandit, and or pirate camp, whatever they call themselves on this planet. It appeared to be a bunch of filthy, dirty swine, quite literally once more, as these were a bunch of ugly pig pirates. Their hygiene tends to be even worse than that of the Imperials, and that is truly saying something. This appears to be something of a mining operation for them. Perhaps they have something interesting for us. Something tells me, though, that they're not exactly excited to see me. Luckily, these hog-brained bastards can't aim for shit. As the somber, icy cold rain poured down upon all of our heads, I was more than ready to rock the socks of these piggies. I started with their mortar operators since they tried to attack me first and foremost. All's fair and war and, well, more war. I thought it could be a fun idea, though, if I were to take one of their mortars and use it against them. But then I realized that mortars weren't exactly my specialty either. At one point, a large group of them had actually came all around me, started lighting me on fire, beating me with swords, clubs, knives, and anything and everything in between, shooting me as much as humanly possible. Strangely enough, with their teamwork and combined efforts, they actually injured me enough that I decided to try and make a break for it for at least a hot moment. I ran away into the forest to sit alone for a moment and ponder on my situation. That's when I realized that the bastards had actually destroyed my suit. I suppose it was inevitable with how much damage the Imperials had done to my clothing already. Nonetheless, I was quite upset about it. It wouldn't take me very long at all, though, to completely heal from all of the wounds that they had inflicted on me, and I was right as rain. But they had severely pissed me off, and I was done playing games with them. Time for something a bit more destructive. Once the heavens were done shooting down a burning light that had the heat of 1,000,000 suns upon them, they started running away, as they should. Of course, though, not all of them would be so lucky. Some of them would end up meeting their end at the end of my blade. Now then, with that over with and the majority of them slaughtered, let's have a look-see at the fruit of their labor. A large storage depot chocked to the brim with many a mineral such as jade, steel, silver, plasteel, yada yada yada, all of the good stuff, if you know what I'm saying. We would even manage to find some important textiles, such as this hyperweave here, that we would end up using to make ourselves a brand new cloak. A little bit perplexing how they got their filthy little porky hands on it, as the organization has hyperweave plentiful, but these pirates, I'm shocked. Nevertheless, after harvesting some of their dyes, we could give it a much more appropriate color. Ah, now that is much better. Finally looking like a true angel of death once more. But our powers are much more ancient than that. Hey, look, some transport pods. You know, I bet they were using these to send their minerals back and forth to their home base. You know, minerals are very heavy. I'm also very heavy. This gives me an idea. Look out, Imperials, up, up, and away, death from above comes to you. Ah, yes, now this is a proper Imperial villa. I'm sure the soldiers here may actually be something of a challenge for us. And no doubt they probably have some very interesting items, weapons, and resources. Ah, yes, a baron of sorts. Now who is this little fancy pants? I look forward to getting up close and personal with you. Oh my, it would seem that they also have nuclear warheads. The organization and myself are all too familiar with these. Perhaps they'll be more of a challenge and a threat than I initially thought. Sure looks like we're about to find out. Well then, I suppose this is a great place to leave you on a cliffhanger, don't you think, friends? Will the v.o.i.d. desperado cowboy, your old buddy Stench, make it out of this one intact? Find out next time. See you later, compadres. Why, howdy, partner. I'm glad to see you back here with me today. Last time we spoke, this handsome gentleman over here was just about to blow me up with a nuclear warhead. Let's see how he does. Oh, no. I'm afraid that just won't do, friend. You're a bit too slow on the trigger there. I suppose it's my turn now, isn't it? Very well. After much fighting outside, I decided to run inside the villa where I could watch them all die with some beautiful scenery around me. The Baron would be one of the first to go, of course. Oopsie. Her personal guard and soldiers were in complete shock and disarray after watching me turn her head into a canoe. Some of them continued to try to fight me off, but I would send their souls straight to hell for doing so. And after watching many of their comrades fall, some of them got a bit of a wise hair to them and ran away like the cowards that we know that they are. But you know me, if I'm anything, I am charitable, so I kindly would send all of their souls straight to hell after chasing them down as they were trying to run away. Ah, you know, this place truly is beautiful. The Shattered Empire is just absolutely dog shit in so many ways, but their architecture rivals that of even the organization. Sort of. And that is exactly why it pains me ever so much in my little black heart that I have to help them redecorate the villa. First and foremost, I think a bit of demolition is in order, don't you? Ah, such a pity we couldn't just leave it intact and use it as maybe a base of operations, or we could put a giant organ farm here after we set up the labor camps after the invasion. Nevertheless, I just wanted something of a souvenir at the very least. Is that too much to ask for? I don't think it is. Well, speak of the devil, what have we here? Don't worry, little one, I won't kill you. Yet. I wanted an entire imperial villa as a souvenir, but I suppose a little imperial pet could satiate my appetite. Alright, little fella, you're coming with me, and we shall leave these horrific burning ashes of ruins to themselves. There's nothing here for us anymore anyhow. Nothing here for anyone. That's the plan anyway. Now with that behind us, we began heading to a nearby Neanderthal village. Not to worry though, we mean them no harm, as the tribes and what have you on these planets are really no threat to us at all, and thus we need a population to work in our labor camps and organ farms. I did however find it quite amusing that after all the devastation that we've been inflicting against this planet, one of its factions actually offered us a persona core, hoping to try and keep us from killing the rest of them, I suppose. Oh, you poor dumb animals. We would end up arriving at the Neanderthal camp a little bit thereafter. They must have been able to sense my dark, brooding, evil presence in their territory, as they all began to gather and huddle together in the center of their little town as if to try to protect one another. Poor, unemployed little creatures will be giving you jobs soon enough. After arriving in the area, I got a bit worried for the health of my new pet, so I cut down a few trees and built him a small wooden cage. This will also help us ensure that he doesn't try to run away. Not that we couldn't catch him, but I'm afraid if he did, I'd have to shoot him in the back of the head. Once we finally had his little box created and we stuffed him inside of it, I unfortunately noticed that he had an infection in his left leg. We don't currently have any medicine either, as there would be no use for it with all of my serums and implantations, and thus I thought it might be a good idea to go and ask the local tribespeople for some. Well, I would end up arriving in their village shortly thereafter, but for whatever reason, they immediately began trying to poke me with some large metallic sticks. Ignoring their advances to try to continue tickling me, I went about my merry little way. Since they were only interested in tickling my sides with their metal sticks, I decided to take it upon myself to go around building to building looking for the medicine. Eventually, I would stumble upon some, though it was the much less desirable herbal medicine made from some type of vegetation on this planet. I suppose it'll do. I stuffed as much as I could into my pockets, and then I began heading back towards my little pet to ensure that he hadn't died. Luckily he hadn't, and I dropped the medicine off there, but I began to notice something. These idiotic Neanderthals, in their efforts to try and tickle me and make me laugh with their spears, had completely torn and ripped my cloak apart. Perhaps we don't need that many slaves for the labor camps after all. Besides, they're completely relentless. Something tells me they wouldn't even make me another if I asked. Very well, you barbaric brutes, have it your way. I immediately began to encircle them, firing my pistols at their massive domes. Lucky enough for us, they are shaped and they look similar to humans, which is something of a comfort to me as I'm quite used to hunting them down, but they are much larger, being Neanderthals, making it much easier to fire at them. This does also mean that they are much tougher than normal humanoids, but if you aim for the head, yeah, it's fine. Well, hello there, handsome. That sure is a nice coat you've got for yourself. You don't mind if I take it, do you? I mean, technically you people owe me one, so now that is much better. To be honest with you, I had no idea that red was even my color, but my, do I look dapper. Ah, yes, our pet. I had almost forgot about the infection that's in your leg that's going to completely murder you. After a bit of quick surgery, thanks to my manipulation, we ended up finishing up a nice peg leg for him. Technically, we could have waited for the infection to have healed, but I don't have that kind of time. We've been on the planet for a whole week and we haven't even taken it over yet. I'm long overdue. We would end up spending some time though trying to convince our pet to join us as our slave, because eventually he's going to become our slave anyhow, or we're going to murder him. We also went back into the Neanderthal village and freed all of their slaves, but don't mistake this for a kindness. They are much more preferable to the Neanderthal tribes people that we had previously murdered, because people who are already enslaved don't normally mind staying that way when v.o.i.d comes to take all the organs. Speaking of which, a little bit of time later and I threatened to cut out our pet's liver with my bare fingernails, and he ended up joining us. Miraculous. Now, at the very least, we don't have to worry about him trying to run away all the time. If you're good, we might even get you a new leg. You know, maybe. But our work is truly never done. It was time for us to begin heading out to yet another imperial settlement to try and murder everyone there and yada yada yada. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath, you already know. It appeared to be a pretty interestingly large military outpost with its very own mining depot and a supply station. No doubt critical and crucial to their infrastructure. Well, it's time to do what we do best and start reaping souls from their previous owners. Just as you would expect with a military installation, it would seem that they too have nuclear warheads. Looks like we're going to have to play on the side of caution in the beginning here. Well, that was a bit of a close call. We definitely need to get a new leg for our pet, otherwise next time he's going to end up as nuclear waste. Given the circumstances, I have decided to give him a battle rifle, but not to worry, as I could crush his head with my pinky anytime I wanted. Besides, I thought it's about damn time he started pulling his own weight around here, and he could do so by helping us out in the battle. I also really wanted to see the look on the other Imperials' faces when they saw one of their own trying to slaughter them. Ah, priceless. Our little pet would go about defending himself quite well, and for an Imperial, we were pretty impressed. Though I must say, we did end up having to save his ass a few too many times, at least more than I would like, but eventually, after killing many of these soldiers, they would finally begin to run away. And of course, by this point, I'm sure you've guessed, but we began chasing them down and killing them and slaughtering them and yada yada yada. You know, we couldn't just let them go so silently into that good night. There was the possibility, however, that not all of the Imperials had fled, so we began going building to building throughout the entire outpost, looking for any more of them to kill, as well as any useful items once more, but we actually ended up coming upon a throne room. Within was a very luxurious and gorgeous looking woman with a golden crown atop her head. She appeared to be a Stellarch, a once very respectable and powerful leader within the Shattered Empire, before it shattered, that is. Now reduced to a pitiful stone throne room in the desert, it would seem. Not so powerful after all, eh? I will say, though, based on the technology of her augmentations and the fact that she's a sanguiphage, that this empire on this planet is probably one of the better branches that we've seen after its fall. Speaking of her augmentations, though, I noticed that she had an Archotech leg, which was absolutely just what the doctor ordered. I wasted no time locating some medicine so that I could hack it off with my bare hands, and then finish her off as well. See you later, darling. I'm sure you geniuses have figured it out, but just in case you haven't, I'm actually going to install the Archotech leg in place of the peg leg on our little pet, and it went quite well. After this, we continued going throughout the outpost. At one point, I found a psychic suppressor. I thought I felt a little tickle in the back of my mind. Psychic-based weaponry, yet another example of how the empire of this planet is pretty technologically advanced compared to others, as most don't even have this. But it takes more than a little machine to break my brain. I would eventually find a very heavily guarded area in a small hill with plenty of turrets. After destroying those quite easily, I entered and I realized just why it was so heavily guarded. Well, would you look at that? Quite the little nuclear stockpile you have here, Imperials. They actually had 8 fusion warheads just sitting on a shelf right next to an exploding turret. Well, it exploded after we shot it, which almost was a pretty bad situation. You know, throughout the cosmos, our enemies will always harness the power of an atom to try and destroy us. Perhaps it's time for a little bit of payback. Besides, it could really speed up the process of conquering this planet I'm behind anyhow. We decided to load up a mortar as well as the warheads into a truck that was nearby the outpost. We were faster on foot, but the truck could carry more, and it was less likely that they would know who was coming. After forgetting to get the footage of us traveling to the next Imperial settlement, we ended up arriving. Cue the bombing montage. Ashes, dust, flames, and nuclear waste. Nothing more, nothing less. You don't know how much joy it brings to my heart to turn the tables on them like this. All at the cost of a little bit of light radiation poisoning, even with my synthetic lungs and all of my implants and everything else. I still got a little bit sick from all of these bombs. And as you can see, we have absolutely 100% crippled, if not completely decimated, any type of hold that the Shattered Empire had on this planet at all. And since they were the governing power power, the closest thing to a threat that we would have faced. Now we are able to begin expanding. Of course though, this is just the very beginning, a very small drop of blood in what is going to be a very large biological machine. There's still so much to do and so many more places to conquer, but I begin to wonder, this planet has a couple of moons. I suppose it's possible the Imperials could have bases there on those heavenly bodies as well, and if not, or even if so, perhaps we could build our own base. Well, I suppose only time will tell. Until next time, friends. Howdy, partner. It is I, Stench, your chaotic, colossal void associate. The last time we saw each other, I was a bit busy completely collapsing the imperial government of this planet by giving them a little bit of a taste of their own medicine with their own fusion warheads, giving the organization an ample opportunity to go ahead and begin some colonization efforts of this planet, with little to no resistance from the Empire. Although, even with that being the case, our mission is not yet complete, as we still have quite a few settlements and cities that are owned by the Empire. However, many of these settlements and cities, like the ones you're currently looking at, are actually on a remote island or part of the same continent that is actually stuck behind some impassable mountains, meaning that if we want to get there, we're going to have to fly or take the sea. Well, my pet, it's time for us to load up into the old truck and begin making our way there, I suppose. Not to worry, I realize we can't drive over the mountains in the truck. We are going to be making a little bit of a pit stop at a nearby pirate city to gather some items. Immediately upon our arrival in the city, the locals were none too happy to see us, so we had to negotiate. Now then, where were we? Ah yes, stripping this city of its resources and items. But alas, for whatever reason, the townsfolk didn't want to part with any of their goods or resources like the fools that they were, so we would have to begin cutting them down, as you could imagine. Oh, you poor dumb creatures, you still have no idea that the organization owns this planet once and for all, and thus they own you and your resources. As I was slaughtering many of the waster pirates, our pet would end up getting hit by a Molotov cocktail, lighting him on fire. His pathetic, squishy body was about to be charred to ashes until I rushed in and started punching him to knock out the flames. You're welcome. Nevertheless, inside the buildings, we began collecting all of the steel plating from the flooring that we could, as we had a little construction project in mind. Luckily, my training under the unlimited wisdom and knowledge of the organization has most research within my grasp, such as constructing a car parts bench. I would let my pet take a little snooze to begin helping him heal from his burning wounds, while I went about making some proper car parts that we would be taking with us on our journey. We loaded them up into our little hot rod speedrunner truck, and we were off. We began heading for the nearest shoreline that we could here on the west coast, not too far off from the part of the continent where the Empire was hiding. Not for much longer, I might add. We immediately pulled up to the sandy shores of the beach here, and I had my enslaved comrade begin unloading our truck of all its resources and car parts, to which I would use to build us a boat, a small steel little dinghy. Technically, there were many ways to get around those mountains, but I thought a nice scenic view of the ocean and the rivers would be nice. Besides, bombing all of their settlements last episode actually had me ahead of schedule, so we weren't exactly in a rush anymore, thankfully, and we could take things nice and slow as we began making our way up the river just next to one of these imperial towns, before we would finally make our move and begin to infiltrate. Ah yes, finally a proper attack on an imperial town. It has been so long since we haven't just dropped one of their own fusion warheads, completely annihilating and erasing any life form within a certain vicinity. After taking a look around, this appears to be a supply depot of a personal stellarch for the Empire, just basically somewhere where they collect resources and they'll send them to one of these private villas for their leaders. It was a bit hard to say exactly as to where this villa was, but I noticed that they had a ship that was capable of space travel, and I think I'm beginning to get a hint. I bet the ship's GPS has a travel log of exactly where the villa is. Well, there's only one way to find out, but I will have to try to stop them from escaping in it if I have any hope of getting a hold of that GPS. Luckily, I have a little trick up my sleeve from the first episode. Ah, so much for a proper fight away from bombing them into hell, but I guess it's needed. As I began to approach the supply depot, I would send my dog into hiding in between a little bit of some steel and some rock or something, just so he doesn't die, and also so he doesn't get in the way and get his dumb ass killed. Thankfully, as we approached, we would manage to get a little bit of a proper fight by shooting a few of them in the head, but I noticed the majority of them running for the ship, so we would have to use the bombardment targeter. Well, there went our chance of having some real fun, but I suppose I could at the very least hunt down a few of them who were attempting to escape, as well as a couple of them who were foolish enough to try to stay and use the mortars. I suppose a tiny bit of excitement was better than none at all. Still pretty boring though. With that, we would do the standard procedure of going building to building, looking to see if there were any leftover soldiers or civilians or anything useful, of course, which we found nothing. Of course though, we did find the ship, and it looks like the keys are still in this bad boy. How about we take it for a joyride? Bit of a crash landing, but it would seem that the coordinates in the GPS took us exactly where we wanted to go. I had rushed in so fast that the soldiers hadn't even noticed me, which was very funny because I killed one of them on my way in and destroyed the door. You know, I began to think though, with all of those soldiers in that room like that, if I could somehow puncture their spacesuits, I bet that I could probably kill them all with asphyxiation and decompression. Well, would you look at that? Quite a coincidence, eh? What are the odds? A special tool that's going to help us later. I think this bad boy is going to do exactly what we need it to. Ripping a massive hole in the villa as well as their cataphract armor, exposing them all to the void of the moon. I must say, of all the ways that I have learned to kill Imperials, this might be one of my top 5. No, top 3. And as you can see, they're all, well, dead. As we continued our travels throughout their little moon base, we eventually came upon what appeared to be some type of rudimentary spacesuit. My guess is this was an emergency suit for the Stellarch who we just killed. You know what though, I think it's exactly my color. Now, in all honesty, due to all my augmentations, I don't even need oxygen realistically, but I thought that wearing this made me look the part more. Besides, it was fun. Before we would leave, we were going to finish off every single Imperial in this little moon villa, so we went room to room. Eventually, I would find a throne room chock to the absolute brim with more Imperials. I was curious why they didn't come out of this room to try and attack us, but it would seem that this was the only room in the entire villa that hadn't been exposed to the moon's surface, and I suppose maybe they were afraid even though they're in cataphract armor, I don't know. But if I could be honest with you, they were right to be afraid. Fear is like nicotine in my veins. Well, we took quite the pounding there, but it seems that we're going to have the last laugh as they all lay around and die from asphyxiation. Well, so much for our pretty little spacesuit, I suppose. I preferred my other suit anyway. Now to pick some of these bullets out of my skin. I did notice though, next to the charred and burning bodies of all the dying soldiers, there sure are a lot of weapons. I'd really hate for the Imperial forces to come back to their moon base and get those. So just as any other responsible associate, I would leave them a little parting gift next to these spreading flames. And just like that, my pet, we're off on to our next adventure. As we began to make our way back to the planet, I thought it might be a good idea for us to go ahead and find a proper spot for a proper base of operations. Oddly enough to some of you, I ended up choosing the northern ice caps as they are sturdy enough for us to build structures on, and this way we won't be impeding in the growing progress and expansion of the organization. Take a look around, my traitorous compadre. This is going to be our new home for the rest of your life until you die in battle battle, or I accidentally kick you or something. But I did end up bringing you a little gift as a thank you could say, for helping me out with all of our battles thus far and not trying to run away. An ancient Archotech machine gun. Don't shoot it all in one place now. You'll spoil your bloodlust. Torius? Is that your name? I didn't even know. Well, I guess I did know, I just didn't really care. Nevertheless, you need a more proper name. I think I'll name you Dog. Yes, that is much more befitting, but don't get too comfy and lazy, Dog. We still have a lot of work to do. Having a base this far north also means there's no resources around us for us to collect, so we're going to have to collect them the only way that we know how, by conquering and destroying. Now, by this point, the Empire on the planet is essentially no more. We've completely destroyed them. We've been doing that for the last few episodes, and they still have a few outposts here and there, and settlements like this one that is actually made of all the types of resources that we need. I think you know where I'm going with this. We're going to kill them. So it begins yet another true and blue battle, an actual fight. Not really, of course, because they stood no chance against us, but it was much better than blowing them up from a distance where we couldn't even enjoy the sight of their death or the sound of their screams. Dog even began to pull his own weight a little bit with his new weapon. We were quite proud of him. He was mowing them down like blades of grass. With their complete and utter annihilation in hand, of course, they began to try to run away, and we would once again get to experience the thrill of the chase as we shot them between the eyes. Now, with them all dead, the only thing left for us to do was to go into their little town here and look around every corner inside the building to ensure that no one shoots Dog in the back of the head, and once that was completed, we could finally begin our deconstruction process, which would take a good bit of time, but thanks to my incredible speed and manipulation skill, I was one hell of a deconstructor, so I had the deconstructing speed of about 10 men or so. Now returning back to our icy frozen hell with all of our brand new bloody resources, we'll at the very least be able to get a good start on a base, though I would maybe like to acquire some more before we really get to building. We are going to be turning this frozen hellscape into a proper home with bedrooms, perhaps some entertainment, a laboratory for sure, and more and more. I know it looks pretty cold, but believe me when I say things are beginning to heat up now. Until next time. Howdy friends, it is I, Stench, your favorite Void associate. Last we spoke, I had just destroyed an imperial city, took all their resources, and I was about to use it to build my own little base here on this ice sheet in the North Pole. Well, enough yapping about it, and let's get started. First things first, for our little structure here, we are going to be building a small room to contain all of our batteries, as well as all of our storage shelves. That way we can actually begin bringing all our resources in, and thus they won't go bad out in the weather. As we were doing so, though, Dog decided that this place could use a name, and I agree with you, my pet, and thus we would actually call it the Velvet Fortress, because obviously it's going to be very well fortified, and for the dog and I, it shall be very comfortable, although this name will be quite ironic for the Imperials and others that we capture and bring here. While still on the topic of comforts, though, we immediately began building 4 or so bedrooms with all of the steel that we had acquired, using wood for our auto doors as we have the least of it. Now we can continue our work without worry that our pet the dog will freeze to death or that his accommodations are not properly met with a nice comfortable bed. He should be quite alright now. But as our dog sleeps, I began to notice that we are completely out of steel as well as many other resources that we require, and thus we are going to need to go out and get some more. Lucky for us, even with the complete collapse of the planetary government, we left a few of their settlements and cities to beg for mercy and also to strip them of their resources. Though I must say, I found it quite hard to find enough room to park the ship. This'll have to do, I suppose. But as I was about to begin harvesting the city of its souls and resources back home, we had a deep space miner fall from orbit. A waster by the name of Wasty, a very fitting name, fell just in our icy midst, and the dog went outside to retrieve him. Meanwhile, I had already began my extensive search throughout the city. I wasn't all that concerned with what I found within, of course, as I was just planning on stripping it all down to the bare bones of steel, plasteel, brick by brick, yada yada yada. All the boring shit, but my boredom would quickly be cured when I began engaging in firefights with some of the local law enforcement. Ah yes, my poor patriotic imperial patrons. How nice of you to die for absolutely nothing. Well, except to put a smile on my face, that is. Ooh, and to give me some of your delectable drugs and other paraphernalia, I should say. I'll say the shattered empire of this planet is pretty dog shit for the most part, as I've said before, but they do brew up some pretty strong psychedelics. Now that the city's defense force and even some of its civilians have been taken care of, and we've had our fill of their nice paraphernalia, it's actually time for us to begin deconstructing every single structure that we can, before making our way back home to drop it off, that is, of course. Now, utilizing the resources that we had acquired, I ended up building some advanced solar-powered generators, but I had not taken into account the fact that the North Pole is extremely dark for the majority of the year, and thus we'll have to revisit that little issue later. As for now, we have much bigger issues at hand, like returning back and forth to the city over and over and over to bring the resources back to our little ice sheet base. Luckily, the city had plenty of biofuel refineries for us to go about making chem fuel for the ship, so no biggie. Given all the machinery and the fact that many of their buildings were already made of steel, steel ended up being our most abundant resource, and thus the resource that we use to expand our base further. We ended up building on a food storage area, a gigantic-ass storage area. We had also got an infinite chem fuel generator on the inside of it, and as you can see on the left, we ended up building 2 advanced wind-powered generators. By this point, we had threatened to cut Wasty's head off with our bare hands somehow, and of course he joined us because he's a little submissive puppy, and I had also decided that our dog's service to us, he's been so loyal, it is actually time to make him an official member of the team, so we arrested him and actually began to attempt to recruit him. I wasn't actually going to make him a member of the organization, but this way he won't try to run away all the time. But now, my friends, we really get to the meat and potatoes of the base itself. This is going to be our surgical room. I hear what you're thinking, large, isn't it? Well, my friends, this isn't exactly your average hospital. This is going to be for our prisoners. The first of what is sure to be many of the organization's official organ farms. Now, of course, we're not monsters. We want to ensure that our patients are going to be nice and comfortable and ready for surgery, so of course we would end up building many things to keep them calm and comfortable. Some examples: a large flat screen television with 2 nice couches, fun, hip, and cool arcade machines to play on, and even a chess table to try your wit and to test your skill. But these are only the beginning of the fun recreational activities that we plan on building. Now, I do realize that this base wouldn't exactly pass any of the organization's standards, and thus we needed some proper defenses. I would begin doubling up on our steel walls, as well as adding many an embrasure with turrets behind them. During this time, we had also tricked our pet into thinking that he is now part of the organization and one of us, even though he's not, but don't tell him that, of course. Now, just to keep him on the up and up, we decided to change his name from Dog. Think of it something of a promotion. His name is now going to be Desconocido. Now, of course, this name suggestion comes from our good friend Sir Ignacio. Initially, for this miniseries, I wasn't going to take any name suggestions, and I still probably won't, but this one time I'm going to make an exception. And I don't know, maybe a few more times, we'll see. I should also mention that to make sure our defenses are above and beyond the expectations of the organization's standards, we built some pretty large machine guns. Perhaps we'll even get to see them in action. Oh, speak of the devil, it would seem the scraps of the Empire have decided to band together and try to attack us. Too little too late, I'm afraid, my friends. Maybe if you tried this an episode or 2 ago, you would have died a little bit slower, but whatever. Our machine guns immediately began bombarding this group of Imperials with bullets. Unfortunately, though, because of the great distance, they were managing to to hit them, but very little of them were dying. Or should I say, fortunately this didn't happen. For you see, my friends, not only did I want to engage them in the icy, snowy blizzard hand to hand and kill many of them myself, but I also wanted to ensure as they began running away that I could run up, punch them in the back of the head, and we could actually collect many of them for our organ farm. One of them went down pretty easy, but the second, I didn't know my own strength, and I ended up bashing his head in with my fist. Oopsie daisy. Not to worry though, as we did end up taking a couple of soldiers, and that's a pretty good start to an organ farm, I'd say. I believe we'll begin with a couple of kidneys just as an appetizer. Now, that of course is just simply a metaphor, as we're not actually going to eat these organs. No, we are going to keep them on our shelf, ice cold from the elements outside for now. No doubt the brass upstairs will give us quite a commendable reward for these puppies, and of course for many more organs that we take, which we hope to get plenty of, but how will we attract more enemies here that we can take and imprison? Ah, just when you have a problem, sometimes it begins to solve itself. It would seem that we have a deserter from the Empire wanting to join us here, no doubt hearing about their complete collapse and how we've decimated them, so of course we've accepted. Now the deserter himself we would end up arresting, as I thought we could harvest his organs, but then as the large raid of Imperials came, I thought, we would really like to have more organs, and those people have organs as well. I think you see where I'm going here. We, as well as our pets, would actually begin engaging the enemies, though they had to back up a bit as I began to finish them off all on my own. Sometimes it can be quite depressing being the strongest thing on the planet, when even gigantic barrages of rockets can't kill me. Hey, stop, it tickles! We continued chasing down the cowards as they began to flee, although some of them were left behind and perfect for our organ farm, of course. Though I think we may have to give them a little bit of time to heal, as I'm guessing many of those livers, kidneys, and lungs are probably pretty bruised up. You know what, on second thought, there's really only one way to know for sure, am I right? Not to worry, little ones, we won't take anything, too vital, I guess. As for the deserter known as Packus, now, like I said, initially I was going to harvest his organs as well, but he did bring us a gigantic onslaught of potential patients, and thus I thought we did owe him the common courtesy of allowing him to be enslaved by us. You're welcome. Of course, though, the meals that we've stolen from the settlements and cities that we've decimated are only going to last us so long, so I began using the rest of our resources that we currently have in our possession to go about building some hydroponics basins and a growing room for food. A large populace of kidney cows, as they're commonly known throughout the galaxy, is going to need plenty of food, preferably rice in this case. Alrighty folks, step right up, as we've had one of your kidneys, but now folks, we need a lung from each of you. Ah yes, now this is quite the little organ pile, isn't it? So many in fact that we could roll around in them if that's something we chose to do. Look, even I have standards, okay? The organization has set up a few new settlements around our organ farm, that way we can exchange our organs for anything that we like within their grasp, which is basically damn near anything within the galaxy, so we began loading up all of our organs into our ship and we would start to fly out, but before we did that, it seems we have a war merchant from one of the Neanderthal tribes. This was a bit strange initially because most factions are none too happy to see us, but it would turn out that this little village of Neanderthals is apparently allied with the organization, perhaps even worshipping us as gods, or doing this so that we don't murder them all. Either way, I'm cool with it. Anywho, the organ trade begins. Toodaloo, friends. Luckily, they were in pretty close proximity, so it was easy to make it there and back home with some of our new items. We exchanged all of our organs for a corpse gun, a ghost implant, a void tech AI implant, as well as a void tech stomach. Since our dog is as loyal as he is, we decided to implant all of these new enhancements into him. He's hardly anything close to an associate, but with that new AI implant, he's pretty darn close, I'll say. Perhaps he may actually join the organization yet, but only time shall tell if he's truly worthy enough. Now that we've taken a good majority of their organs, I feel it's time for us to finish off our kidney cows. You can just call me the old heart bandit, baby. But you might be asking yourself, where are you going to get more kidney cows for more kidneys, lungs, and hearts there, Stinch? Not to worry, friends, for the world is our oyster. Until next time. Hey there, friendos, it's your old pal Stench, the harbinger of terror and taker of organs. Good times. Last time I saw you, we had just built this organ farm outpost here on the ice sheet in the North Pole. There ain't a lot of sunlight here, unfortunately, and the wind can be a little bit spotty, so it looks like we're having some power issues at the moment, something that I hope to rectify quite swiftly. When the organization originally sent me here to go about crippling the imperial government, they unfortunately didn't provide me with any of their power cells, but that's quite alright, as I find it quite interesting and more of a challenge to use my spoils of war, i.e. steel, uranium, and other resources to build my own form of power generation. And in case you need it spelled out for you, I'm actually going to be building a nuclear power generator. I know, a bit of a backwards type of power generation, nothing compared to the superior technology of v.o.i.d, but it's fun. Also, don't worry, I did remember to eventually ventilate the reactor room, that way we didn't have a gigantic meltdown destroying the polar ice caps. And since we plan on making this an official organ farm of the v.o.i.d, we also need a proper place to put our ship and land it and take off and, somewhere it won't be destroyed, of course. This will also make for the perfect place to go about sending and receiving transport pods, though I must say I have become quite accustomed to my stolen imperial ship by this point. It's also important to mention that this place is not only going to be an organ farm, but also a bit of a fuel depot, plus we need some fuel for our ship anyhow. Now you may be asking yourself, Stench old pal, what are you going to be making fuel out of? Well, we sure do have a lot of frozen imperial corpses out there on the ice, so I thought why not just cut them all into pieces, little small chunks, and then begin blending them into some chem fuel. I mean, there is always a reason that we leave just enough of them to continue trying to attack us to get their revenge. They tend to make for excellent nutrient-paced meals and organs, of course, but also chem fuel. Speaking of the foolish Imperials always attempting to get their revenge, it was time for us to begin setting up some more defenses. We have to ensure that in our brief absence, the base is able to tend to itself, and I think these gigantic uranium turrets should be able to handle it. We wrap them, as well as our pre-existing defenses, in human leather sandbags. I think it adds a nice little flair and touch to the place. But if you'll excuse me, it's time to go and stir up a little bit more trouble. Flying to yet another nearby imperial town to wreak a little bit of chaos and havoc, and to continue sowing the seeds of desperation. Ah, Imperials, it has been ever so long, too long even, I would say, reaping your pathetic, desperate little souls as you cling to what is left of your empire and your planet brings me such joy. It really scratches a little tickle in the back of my brain. I really wish that I could tell you that the Imperials and their defenses put up one hell of a fight. They really gave us a run for our money. They had your old pal Stench on the ground and had him on the ropes. They were about to beat me, but even as evil as I am, I wouldn't lie to you, this was a cakewalk. I had managed to lure the majority of their soldiers that remained out into an open ground where I could fire at them with very little cover to protect them. This would cause the majority of them to die, of course, as you could imagine, and the others began to flee as I shot at them like fish in a barrel. Not all of them died. For example, this pathetic one crawling around like a worm would be taken to a nearby shelter where I would actually tend to her wounds, as well as one of her pathetic comrades, although I didn't plan on keeping them as pets. No, I had other plans in mind by harvesting their organs, such as their kidneys, their lungs, and then ultimately their hearts. This wasn't exactly an ideal operating room, but I've made do with much worse. It wouldn't be long thereafter before I returned back to the base with all of our newly acquired riches, as well as the organs, of course, most importantly, though the resources I had also taken from the Imperials were very crucial to building a large shield generator for the base. This, accompanied with all of our newly found gigantic turrets, marks the absolute end of any fraction of hope that they would have had to even put a scratch on the walls of this base, as it can actually deflect any type of nuclear warheads or other shells they could drop on us, though it does suck up a large reservoir of power when it initially activates, so we would have to replace a lot of our old stolen batteries that we have been using with some advanced ones. Again, we could easily get some void power cells from the organization, but I like a challenge. And besides, I'm curious to see if this base we've made from scrap materials from conquering all of our enemies will hold up against them. We just need to wait for an attack. Ah, yes, there they are, immediately ready for our target practice from our newfound turrets, which seem to be taking them on quite well, though we would actually disable them for a hot moment just to see what was going on, and it appears that the Imperials actually plan on sieging us. Not only that, but with some large nuclear warheads, the perfect test for our new shield. However, I'm afraid we'll never even get to see this test in action, as I got a little bit too close to them and they started shooting me, so, I had to shoot them back, and I ended up killing most of them. But we did take many of them prisoner and take them into our organ farm, so that's some good news, of course. Besides, there's hardly any point in testing the shield if they can't even get close enough while our turrets are on. After spending many an hour harvesting a nice warm kidney or two, we had quite the fat stack of organs on our shelves. No doubt the organization will be quite pleased and quite tickled with these, as well as all the human leather as well. We tend to like to make our suits out of it, as well as a few bits and bobs in our masks. It just gives us a nice comfy feeling. But without further ado, let us take this load over to the nearest settlement. Thankfully, the brass upstairs was able to exchange many of the organs that we had harvested for some void tech bionic and a lethality implant. We actually installed all of these, as you probably could have guessed, on our pet desconocido, pushing him one step closer to becoming an associate within the organization. Originally, I didn't have all that much hope for him, but now he's really beginning to look the part, is he not? A chip off the old block, I'd say. I guess I should probably also mention that I exchanged plenty of hearts and kidneys to get myself 2 gigantic wraith cannons. Oh yeah, these bad boys could level a small city. But you know what, I think it's finally time. The organ farm base here is self-sustaining, and with our pets left behind, in our absence, the operation should continue to go smoothly, meaning that we are free to move on and go on to bigger and better things. Now that the Empire's taken care of, the second strongest faction would be the Outlanders. Of course, they are quite friendly with us since we have no quarrel with them, or that they know of course, but we're about to start one. We arrived in one of their cities and made some parking room for ourselves before going on what could only be described as a bloodthirsty rampage with our blade. The local law of the Outlander city did their best, they really did, but they were no match for me, unfortunately. Now then, let's test out our cannons, eh? Eventually, though, as the sun began to set, our rampage throughout the city would come to an end. I was quite tickled and pleased with our new weapons, and as were the slaves of the Outlanders who had now been emancipated until we eventually put them in an organ farm. Now then, off to the moon we go. I mentioned a few episodes ago how I'd like to build something of a base on this desolate little barren heavenly body, whose beautiful lunar landscapes know no bounds. With many of the resources that we had taken from the city, we shall build our own base once more. I also thought the moon would be a good idea, just as I had thought the ice caps would be a good idea. That way we stay out of the way of the organization's expansion and conquering of the factions of this world. I decided that I actually wanted to try to shove a base inside the mountainous dunes of the lunar surface itself by mining away some of the stone. The majority of the resources used here was, of course, steel, and I ended up building some solar panels for some proper power generation, as well as some advanced batteries. With the necessities out of the way, I could also build myself a large golden and steel throne. Like I've said before, the Imperials do truly have a knack for craftsmanship as well as fashion, so I decided to fasten a grand throne like theirs. I also made plenty of drapes, 2 couches, and even some nice, comfortable, beautiful looking rugs out of the residents of the Outlander city. Ah, yes, it's all coming together now. Upon this rock I shall build my church. What have we here? A crashing shuttle, eh? That's interesting. Well, well, well. These are not your typical Imperials. These, my friends, are the clones, the soldiers of the new empire forming across the galaxy. Nothing more than a quick fading fad, I'm sure. But I must say, I do hear that they're quite formidable, and throughout all my travels, throughout all the worlds that I've conquered, I've never faced them before, so I was quite eager to do so. Let's have a little taste, shall we? Oh, they are indeed formidable. That's not exactly what I was expecting. This may be the very first time that I felt pain in many, many years. No, this has to be a fluke. I will not be made a fool of. I'll slaughter them all. Well, friends, I guess it wasn't exactly a fluke after all, was it? Even with my death, my mission was complete. We had set up our organ farm back on the planet, and the planet was almost completely taken over by the organization at this point. These damn clones have no idea what's waiting for them on the surface. But don't worry about your old friend Stench. If you know anything about the organization and its associates, you know we always resurrect at least once. Until I see you again, my friends.